what I believe could be important elements in charting the way for the digital transformation of Namibia. As you can see, it's beautiful weather around Lake Geneva this morning, but the snow is coming very close. So I will rush to make sure that I finish on time before the clouds accumulate. So let me share my screen right now and go directly to the presentation. And the idea is that we should be looking at a post-COVID global economy. This means that although the pandemic is certainly not over yet, strategically it's important to think of what the world of tomorrow will be. And I understand that my role today is to give an international perspective. We've heard this morning already a number of very vivid descriptions of the efforts made in Namibia around digital transformation. It is also important to understand what's happening in the rest of the world, what other countries, whether they are similar to Namibia or totally different, are doing under the constraints that each of them must face. To do that, I will move to the purpose of this presentation, which is to stress the importance of technology in the current transformation of the world economy. Second, I will stress how benchmarking and measurement are important to stimulate and monitor this digital transformation. Third, I will go a bit deeper into looking at what's happening in Africa as a whole, and Namibia in particular, before concluding on some elements about what future readiness might mean for Namibia. So these 5 points I'm going now to explore, starting with the first one, which tells you that sometime economists can be logical people, technology readiness and the NRI. So since I'm not sure everybody in the audience is familiar with NRI, which is the Network Readiness Index, let me tell you a few words about it right away. NRI is an annual benchmark that in its latest edition covered 132 economies. The key metrics that NRI uses are around ICT for development and competitiveness. It is almost 20-year-old. It was launched in 2002 by the World Economic Forum. At the time, I was still part of the World Bank, and we collaborated very, very dynamically to create what was the first index tracking the network readiness of countries, and especially emerging countries at the time. In 2019, a major change happened where the governance of the index was passed on from the World Economic Forum to Portulans Institute, and we took advantage of that to actually reshape the model around something that was less technology-centric and more people-centric. What the media remember every time we launch the report is the rankings. And the last point on this slide, which I put intentionally in bold characters, is for me critically important. Although we rank national economies, the NRI is not about naming and shaming. It is about action. It is about being ammunition for those who want to change things on the ground. And the practicality of the index is for us its main quality. The NRI model is basically a holistic model which relies on 4 pillars. The first 2 pillars, as you can imagine well, are about technology and people. And the last 2 pillars are about governance and impact. And a number of the elements that have been mentioned already by previous speakers are to be found in that model. We disaggregate its 4 pillars into a total of 12 sub-pillars, and we distribute some 60 variables across these pillars. So it's a very broad-ranging kind of idea. businesses, individuals use technology, and we also try to quantify the degree of trust, the quality of regulation, the importance of SDGs in developing the digital transformation technologies and strategies that we are looking at in those 132 countries. How is Africa faring in such a context? So let me give you the global picture first. As I mentioned before, what most newspapers will typically pick is who is ranking at the top, who are the champions of network readiness. So I will not escape that, I will not try to escape it. Just to mention that last year, these were the top 10. So Sweden, Denmark, Singapore were the top 3, followed by Netherlands, Switzerland, and you also see the United States and the United Kingdom and Germany in that top 10. One thing actually springs to the eye of any observer of this table, which is that high-income countries continue to dominate network readiness. This is hardly a surprise. Having more capital, having more technology definitely helps. But there's also a number of things we can observe in these top 10. One is that it's not vital to be a big economy to rank at the top. Sweden, Denmark, Singapore, Netherlands, Switzerland are all countries with less than 10 million people. So it is feasible, and maybe agility is a key ingredient in developing the right strategies when you deal with information technology. One other interpretation is that openness is critically important in that context. Those small countries had no choice. Because they were small, they had to be part of globalization. They had to be open to external trade, investment, ideas, and culture. And that also, as we shall see, will be increasingly important in defining successful digital transformation strategies of tomorrow. So if we go a little bit deeper in the index, that is disaggregating the data per pillar or sub-pillars, we see that the champions in one are not necessarily the champions in the other. If I take the example of people, for instance, Denmark is outperforming everybody else, but followed closely by Korea. If we take impact, another example, Singapore is the world leader, followed by Switzerland and Sweden. So there are a number of ways in which we can examine, we can play with this data, and we can infer what is critically important from a policy point of view. We can also disaggregate the data per income group. We can say, okay, Namibia does not have the same tools to engineer and implement digital transformation as the rich countries, whether it is the United States, Sweden, Switzerland, Singapore might have. True, but what is important is to see that in each of these categories, we have champions, we have role models, we have sources of inspiration. So if I look at the category of low-income countries on the right side of the slide, we see that indeed the world leader is an African country. It is Rwanda, who is a small, landlocked country. So again, there are examples and sources of inspiration to be found in every income group. The same is true if we look at it from the global point of view. This is what we call the bubble chart. So I realize that from wherever you may stand in the room, it's difficult to see the details. And this is not what this chart is intended to. I give you the details. It is intended to give you the global picture. So let me describe it, insisting on 3 elements. The first one is that this is a 2-dimensional diagram. On the horizontal axis, you have the GDP per capita. So rich countries on the right, poor countries on the left. On the vertical axis, you have the Network Readiness Index score. Those that are performing poorly are at the bottom, and the champions are at the top. And you see a strong correlation. This big black line that goes across the diagram is the polynomial regression line, which means that if you're above that line, you actually perform better on NRI than what your GDP per capita would lead any analyst or observer to expect. is India. And both these countries are above the regression line, which is good news. It means that somehow the digital divide is being diminished. But that's not true for every single country on this chart. And again, looking at Africa, we see a number of countries significantly below the regression line, while others are significantly above. So let's go a bit deeper into this African box. And what we see in the top performers in the region is that Mauritius comes first, South Africa second, and Kenya third. It doesn't tell us much about the correlation between income, development strategies, population, and economic dynamics. It, however, tells us that, again, the concept of being an open economy is certainly playing in favor of some of these African economies. Moving to the greater degree of detail in this data, we see that Africa remains a continent of disparities. I will not insist too much on that because maybe the debate and the panel will goes back to that. But disparities are a concern. There is a distinct possibility that COVID may increase inequalities among African countries. If we look at pillar performances, we see the same picture with slight differences. Contrary to what many analysts have led us to believe, governance is one of the areas where Africa performs better. So what central banks are doing, what regulators are doing, clearly goes in the right direction. If we look at it by region, because we should not forget that Africa is not a homogeneous continent, and that different parts of the continent have different strategies and interests, we also see encouraging signs in trust, for instance. This has been underlined by previous speakers, making sure that your data, whether it is personal data, whether it is sensitive data, can be entrusted to your bank, to your intermediaries, is critically important. But we also see that inclusion is an area in which much progress has been made in Africa. I will not insist too much on the sub-continental results, just to point at Southern Africa, where the top triangle includes South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia. These are clearly the countries that are leading the effort and are seen both at the African level but also globally as moving in the right direction in terms of network readiness. So if we now narrow this down from Africa to the specific context of Namibia, this is the enlarged version of the African box I described earlier. We see Namibia on the right side of this box, which means that in terms of income per capita, it is indeed doing better than most other African countries. What is a source of concern is that Namibia should be under the regression. In other words, Namibia is one country that has the resources, economic resources in particular, but also social resources, human capital resources to do better. So how can Namibia do better in the future in terms of network readiness and digital transformation? Well, to do that, to answer that question, it's important to go down to the level of pillars. And we see that indeed the rankings could be improved. We also see that the people pillar is one in which the country has already done significant progress as far as the technology. On the impact side, this is probably where the efforts are required as a priority. Having a lower ranking on impact basically means something very simple. It means that you're not receiving the full reward of the efforts made. So clearly, this is an area where it is worth giving attention and devoting additional resources and efforts. visible. We had a very successful launch last year of the previous edition of the Network Readiness Index. By the way, I should indicate here that the next edition will be released in a few weeks from now. But last year, Dr. Vera Sangwe, the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, insisted that even though there is a lot of celebration around how far Africa has come, and I quote, in terms of digitization, there still is a lot more that needs to be done if we really want to deliver an inclusive Africa. And this accent on inclusion struck the audience at the time because it goes down very much around what we heard already this morning. Consider technology as a mean to an end, and digital transformation as a potential accelerator of Namibia's economic and social progress is the key mantra around which efforts have been organized and around which they can be stimulated. The big difference that COVID made, and I will insist on that again in a minute, is that before COVID, digital transformation was seen by many as a priority. Now it is seen as an imperative. There's little choice but indeed to go along with the acceleration of digital transformation. It is not just a constraint, it is also a big source of opportunities. And this is where I would like to insist on the fact that key priorities to be considered include at least 7. And I will not paraphrase this slide. I will just insist on 2 elements. Number 1, the system-wide approach. It is not enough to develop one link of the chain in developing digital transformation. You have to look at the same time at education, which includes basic education, upskilling, reskilling. You have to look at investment, how are public and private resources being used. You have to look at inclusion, for instance. You have to select the pillars in your own national strategies that can be best linked to digital transformation. As I mentioned before, and that is number 4, COVID has accelerated this process, and this should be seen by emerging countries, and Namibia in particular, as a source of new opportunities. And last but not least, number 7, build on success and address critical gaps is the way to go. You need to create enthusiasm around digital transformation, especially for the younger generation. And pointing at what has been done, what has been successfully carried out, is critically important. It is not self-complacency. This is just telling everybody who needs to be involved, look, we've been able to do that. We're not so bad. We're actually pretty good. Let's do it in another area where it is equally important. And if we do that, then we end up with what will be the conclusion of this presentation, which is what we call future readiness. We've been handling a number of global indices over the last 20 years. NRI is just one of them on technology. The talent index is something that has become critically important and visible over the last few years, and the global innovation index is now the globally best recognized benchmark for assessing the ability of national economies to innovate. If we combine those 3, we have indeed a fairly detailed vision of how a particular national economy is ready for the future. And we give its full potential to technology and to digital transformation. So this is what we've been working at lately, in particular with partners like Google. We've been launching the Future Readiness Report at the UN General Assembly in September. We'll be launching the 2nd edition in Davos at the end of January. And the recipe is always the same. So I took the example of another country that has many similarities with Namibia. We may discuss that in the panel, which is Chile in Latin America. This is just one example to show you how this report is presented. The website is highly interactive. You can simulate position, you can introduce your own data, and you can try to see how well the data from NRI to the data from the future readiness report indeed gives you a stereoscopic vision of what the future of your own country might be. So this is what I wanted to say in the time I had. I hope it was clear enough, and I look forward to discussing further in the question and answer section. Thank you very much for your attention.